Hey guys, welcome back to Talking the Talkies. My name is Peter Waters, and today I'll be going over all of my favorite first-time watches for the month of November 2021. So here we go. The first movie I'm going to talk about today is from 1973, and it's called Terminal Island. This movie was directed by a woman, Stephanie Rothman, who was one of the few women working in exploitation movies back in the 70s. She started her career working under Roger Corman, who horror fans will know he was like king of the B movies, and he kind of gave the rise to a lot of now very famous filmmakers like Martin Scorsese and James Cameron, and Stephanie Rothman is one of those people. So Terminal Island was actually a movie she made after she had left Roger Corman, and she made her own production company, Dimension Films. And this is pretty much a sort of alternate reality movie where instead of prisons, the state of California decided that it will take all of its murderers and criminals and put them on an island with no rules, no regulations, just out of sight, out of mind, dump anyone who is convicted of a crime on an island and left to fend for themselves, pretty much. So basically what happens is this Lord of the Flies type society emerges out of all these criminals and things like that, and there are pretty much two main camps. One is like the alpha males, and they imprison all the women for whatever they want. You know, they have to, forced into labor and whatever whims that they have. And then there's another camp who are sort of revolutionaries, and they're trying to fight for equality between men and women. So in this weird way, it's this exploitation movie, and yes, there's lots of like mindless violence and nudity in it and things like that, but at the same time, underneath it, and I think because it was directed by a woman, it has this sort of feminist angle. In fact, the New York Times referred to this movie as a, quote, crafty feminist allegory. Alright, my next movie is from 2002, and this is a psychological thriller called May, and this one is about a lonely young woman who grew up with a lazy eye, and she grew up with no friends, and she has sort of a dark, traumatic childhood past. Because she has a lack of social skills from growing up with this sort of physical deformity or ailment, she has a tough time connecting with people. So like her coworkers, she has a lot of awkward confrontations with, and recently she has her eyes set on, a romantic eye set on a mechanic that works nearby, and at first they start to develop like a thing. They go out together, and the mechanic at first is sort of charmed by her odd personality, but slowly but surely things start to get sinister, especially once he decides maybe she's a little too strange and he wants to move on, but she isn't ready to move on. The main actress in the film, Angela Bettis, I think you pronounce it, or Betty's, I'm not sure, but she is so good in this movie. I'm kind of shocked I haven't seen her in anything else. She really plays up, being able to sympathize with this person who is, going to very dark and twisted places. So sort of like Joaquin Phoenix with the Joker. It's a portrait of a downward spiral of insanity, which is always my favorite types of movies. If characters are their slow descent into madness, if that's on the back of the box, I am going to enjoy it probably. So May, very well done movie, very well acted, low budget thriller. I highly recommend that one. Alright, next up is a movie from 1992 called Dr. Giggles. Now, this is not quite as serious a movie as May, but it also is sort of a slasher movie. So very much in the same spirit as like Nightmare on Elm Street with Freddy Krueger. Dr. Giggles is a horror villain who is not afraid to make quips and jokes before he's killing people. His backstory is that when he was a kid, his father was a ethically dubious surgeon who would kill patients and harvest their organs in an attempt to resuscitate his mother. So once Dr. Giggles becomes Dr. Giggles growing up, he sort of takes on his father's legacy and starts murdering people with all kinds of surgical tools. But what makes this movie so much fun are A, the kills are really inventive for a slasher film. Like, he uses all kinds of like medical tools that are very over the top and cartoonish, so it's not like some realistic film that will really shock and horrify you. It's over the top in like a Looney Tunes Three Stooges way a lot of the time. And also his quips are hilarious. This movie knows what it is. It knows it's a silly slasher movie. So every time this guy kills someone, he has a one-liner that is just priceless. That has to do with medical puns and things like that. Sort of like how Mr. Freeze in Batman and Robin had his ice puns. Dr. Giggle has his medical puns. And I was just delighted watching this movie. Especially after sitting through the recent Halloween Kills movie, which when it attempts humor, it's like really kind of lame, and it takes itself very seriously, thinking it's like this political allegory. To go from that to watching Dr. Giggles, which is just, it knows exactly the genre it is, and it's not pretending to be high art. I really appreciated that, and I really enjoyed it. So if you're into silly horror movies, definitely check out Dr. Giggles. Alright, my next movie is from 1945, going way back in time, and it's called Leave Her to Heaven. And I watched this movie because November was Noirvember, so a lot of movie fans like myself celebrated the month by watching movies in the noir genre, which is pretty much like detective stories and mysteries, and it's sort of like crime and things related to that from like the 40s and 50s, more or less. And Leave Her to Heaven is sort of a mix of noir tropes as well as melodrama from back in the day. It's pretty much about this socialite woman who meets a very well-established author on a fateful train ride, and they begin a romantic relationship. It seems like a picture-perfect marriage until she starts to get extremely jealous of him, and also her past comes back to haunt her in the form of Vincent Price, and I won't spoil too much about that. But pretty much what is so great about this movie is the lead woman who is extremely jealous, and she's like one of the best examples of a femme fatale I've ever seen in a noir, is played by Jean Tierney, and she is so diabolical in certain scenes, but at the same time you sympathize with her. And even though the noir genre gets a bad rap for treating the female characters usually as manipulative and not very nice people, playing off of like the fear of men thinking that women will be independent and things like that, this one, at least, it is really well done, and she's a complicated character. So if you want to watch a movie that really specializes in a great depiction of a femme fatale character, giving her a lot of layers, I highly recommend Leave Her to Heaven. Alright, next up is another noir film from the 1940s. This one's from 1949, and it's called White Heat. This is one that's been on my list for a very long time to see. It stars Jimmy Cagney, who is one of Hollywood's most iconic gangster character actors. He got his start in the movie The Public Enemy, and White Heat sort of comes later on in his career. He sort of reinvented himself, going from gangster roles to kind of his main love, which is song and dance movies, musicals, and he won the Oscar for Yankee Doodle Dandy. But White Heat is a return to form for him in a certain way, and he plays a gangster with his sort of gang, including his fiance or girlfriend and his mother. And it's sort of his weird Norman Bates-like relationship with his mother that makes this movie so interesting. He's basically a mama's boy at the same time as a hitman. And without spoiling anything, it does have one of those iconic final lines in the movies. Most of these movies, the gangster ends up, getting caught in the end, sort of thing, because they couldn't have a movie back then with the bad guys getting away with it. So it's inevitable that he is going to reach the end of the road. But the end of the road in this movie is one of the best end of the roads for gangsters that I've ever seen. So definitely White Heat, I would recommend checking that one out. A lot of these movies from the 40s, sometimes they get really outdated. This one feels relatively modern in its sensibilities. So I would highly recommend checking out White Heat if you want to see an exemplary example of noir films. Alright, next up is a new release that came out on HBO Max recently. This is a documentary called In the Same Breath, and it's from the director of one of my favorite movies of the past few years. It landed on my top 10 list anyway, called One Child Nation. It's from director Nanfu Wang, who's a Chinese-American documentary filmmaker. And One Child Nation was sort of her criticizing the one-child-only policy in China. And in this one, similarly, she's putting a critical eye on her homeland by looking at China's initial response to the COVID virus outbreak in Wuhan. And some of the footage she got for this documentary literally is the sort of thing that could probably get people killed in the Chinese government if they found out. There are cameras in hospitals where the first COVID patients were administered, and it literally gives you an inside look into how some of these early patients were treated and how the government sort of swept stuff under the rug. So it's a really eye-opening documentary with pretty amazing footage. It was a little kind of hard to sit through another like COVID narrative because we've been drowning in these things, but really I think this is kind of an important watch, so I would highly recommend checking out In the Same Breath. Alright, next up is a little bit lighter of a movie. This one is Ghostbusters Afterlife. This is the most recent movie in the supernatural comedy series. So Jason Reitman is directing the film, and his father directed the first two Ghostbusters movies, so it really feels like a real return to the series from the last one. Really what I felt about this movie, it's getting a lot of mixed reviews, but I thought it was a beautiful ode to Harold Ramis. Harold Ramis played the character of Egon in the first two Ghostbusters films, and he passed away recently. It follows his granddaughter, played by McKenna Grace, and she and her family moved to his to Egon's old Oklahoma farmhouse because that's the only thing he left them when he died. And slowly but surely they uncover some like secrets that he'd been working on, and it goes to some sappy places that I could imagine not working for certain people. But I really thought that this was like what Furious 7 did to honor Paul Walker in that movie. I feel like this movie does the same thing for Harold Ramis, where it really feels like it's coming from a pure place of love, and it was funny. The characters were great. I really liked Paul Rudd in this movie as the lazy teacher, the summer school teacher who just put on a movie instead of teaching the kids. I thought that was pretty funny. And some of the action scenes are really well done. There's one car chase that I thought was really good in the movie. So it was just a good time. It was like a sort of summer blockbuster type of movie that made me feel feelings by the end of it. So I would recommend checking that out if you're particularly a Ghostbusters fan. Alright, next up is another noir movie, my last one on this list. It's called Night in the City, and it's from 1950. This one also stars Gene Tierney in a small role. And this one is pretty much about a con man, huckster type character, played by Richard Widmark. And he is sort of insinuating himself into the underground crime scene / wrestling scene in London. And he pretty much just continuously gets in over his head with one failed con artist plot after another. And the whole movie, he's on the run. Literally, the first shot of the movie is him running away from gangsters trying to kill him. So I really thought this was a great movie. He kind of reminded me of like Saul Goodman from Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, where he's just constantly in over his head, and he's just always one step away from maybe being executed by his enemies, but he somehow tries to get away here and there. So Night in the City, I thought this was another really great noir, great character acting in it, just a really solid example of the noir genre. Alright, next up is my pick of the month. This one is a documentary from 1997 called Hands on a Hard Body, and pretty much what this movie is about, it's about a auto dealership in Texas, and they hold a contest every year. I'm not sure if they still have this contest, but pretty much what the participants need to do is they need to leave their hand on a pickup truck, and pretty much the last person to remove their hand from the truck wins the pickup truck. It's as simple as that. But as the hours and days roll on and these people continually have to stand there holding their hand on this thing, they start to mentally unravel, they start to physically unravel, and it's sort of this interesting portrait of who these eccentric people are that are risking their mind and their health to win this car. And it's sort of like this really interesting insight into America, and, a lot of the reasons why these people need the truck is because a truck can help earn them money. They can, carry stuff for their work. You really start to get invested in these people, even though it's sort of shot in a way that looks like it would be just a simple human interest story on like a public access channel. The further along into the movie you get, you really start to get invested in who is going to win, and you start to root for people, and you start to be concerned for them, like as human beings. So it was really interesting. Even though it's just putting your hand on a car, it really was almost as thrilling as watching like Squid Game or The Hunger Games. Like, it feels life or death, even though it's this sort of silly concept when you really start to stop to think about it. I first heard about this movie because one of my favorite directors, Quentin Tarantino, recommended it when he was on Jimmy Fallon. So it's always stuck in my head, I should check this out. And I loved it, so hopefully you love it too. My pick of the month, Hands on a Hard Body. Check it out. Alright, my next pick is a very strange animated film called The Wolf House from 2018. And this is a movie set sort of in South America, made by South American filmmakers, I'm pretty sure. And it's loosely inspired, very loosely inspired, by a true story of ex-Nazis from Germany coming over to Chile. And they sort of created this sort of safe haven for real psychotic people and cult. They sort of formed their own cult where they got away with horrific things, like against children and stuff like that. And the movie is a very abstract portrayal of this very specific historical incident that I honestly had no idea about until I read about afterwards, reading about this movie. And so basically the film is sort of an abstract nightmare that takes place in the mind of a little girl who was present during this time. So it's a stop-motion animated film. It's really an impressive feat of animation. They sort of stop-motion animate not just characters, but an entire room, it appears. And it kind of reminded me a little bit of Loving Vincent, which individually hand-painted portraits to bring Vincent van Gogh's story to life. And it sort of reminded me of that, but mixed with the nightmarish visuals of a David Lynch movie. It was really unsettling, really weird, but amazingly created. Like, it just will blow your eyes out of their sockets, sort of thing. It's just a really incredible looking animated film, unlike anything I've kind of ever seen. I definitely recommend it for animation nerds. Don't let it slip under your radar if you want to see like offbeat animation type things. All right, my final pick for November 2021 is a documentary called Val from this year. It's currently streaming on Amazon Prime. And this movie is like an autobiography of actor Val Kilmer, who you probably know as Batman, and he was in Tombstone, and he was Jim Morrison in Oliver Stone's Doors movie, and Top Gun, of course. He was Iceman. So he's sort of a relatively famous actor, maybe not like Tom Cruise level or anything like that, but he's been a steadily working actor. But until recently, he got throat cancer, and he actually lost his voice, and now he has to use a voice box. And in a weird way, this documentary is almost like Val Kilmer telling his own story, almost eulogizing himself before he dies. So there's this really like heavy tone to the whole movie as he reflects on his career. So it sort of works as an interesting, summary of his career and what his background is, but it's also this sort of sad, eulogy in a weird way. It's like having a funeral before he's even dead, because, he can't act anymore, which is his life. And it's, when he's looking back at his career and like going to, screenings and things and signing things, you can see in his face that he wishes that he could, still have the ability to act and, make new projects instead of reflecting on the past. And it's also really powerful that the narrator for this movie is Val Kilmer's own son, who looks exactly like him. And so it feels very, very personal. It's very well done. Definitely recommend checking that out. I wasn't like a huge Val Kilmer fan going into it, but coming out of it, I have a real newfound respect for the guy, and I really hope this documentary slips into the Oscar nominations this year for the Best Documentary category. So time will tell with that one. But those are all of my picks for November 2021 for my first time watches. I hope you enjoyed watching this video, and keep on the lookout for a couple new videos coming shortly, I'm sure by the end of the year, because I will have my top 10 movies of 2021 coming up soon, as well as my superlatives video and possibly some keyboard stuff later on. So I have a bunch of plans for videos in the future. Again, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it, and until next time, I'll see you later.